think we are entering an era where we are going to see more and more companies hit that kind of 10, 20 million run rate with one, maybe two engineers, just because they're going to have a workflow that enables them to support a vast number of customers, and they're going to be pretty focused on what they deliver. When will we have the first company that is valued at over $1 billion and has one employee? And I think what's really interesting about that bet is the question isn't really if it's going to happen, it's really just a matter of when. And you look at some of these companies like Midjourney, I think is in the 200 million in revenue or something like that. And they have something like 20 employees or maybe a little bit more now, but it's nothing, right? It's just the order of magnitude, the revenue to employee ratio is completely insane. There's a couple more companies that we've never heard of because they're small. Like they're not trying to go after a gigantic market. They picked a niche market that's big enough to get maybe to 100 million in revenue. They take 10% of that and they have 10 employees. Like they are living their best lives.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the All Innovation, the AI podcast. I am here once again, Keenan Hart, and I'm joined by your trusty leader in this journey, Mr. Dante McLean. And we have another amazing leader sitting across this digital table with us, Francis Brero, who is the CEO of MadKudu. Man, thank you so much for joining us, Francis. We really appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
So, one of the things that I think is important for us to be able to kind of set the frame for everybody is today we're going to be talking about innovation, right? Innovation through your journey and being kind of, an entrepreneur, where you started in academia, but more importantly, how you're kind of looking at the future of innovation as well. And so, man, we're super excited to kind of dive into your story, brother.
Yeah, lots of stuff to talk about. So it's going to be action-packed for sure.
As we kind of take off here, Francis, I'd love for you to kind of share briefly, like, where did this journey and curiosity start? So data science meets go-to-market strategy, a really cool intersection, but what did this curiosity behind the data science start?
Yeah, I mean, it started, I've always had a passion for math, which I know is a super nerdy thing to say. And, 15 years ago was not cool, but we live in an era where it is cool to say I'm a math nerd. So I am milking it. So there we go. I went into fundamental mathematics initially in college and then landed an internship at a startup in the Valley where I kind of discovered the real world where people actually make money and sell actual stuff. And it was really interesting to be brought into some of these enterprise sales deals and start understanding, it's not just about the answer you give, it's about how you give the answer. Really interesting in seeing how enterprise reps would prepare for some meetings. And to some extent, it was really cool to see that sales is a mix of an art and a science. And I think we tend to overestimate the impact of the art on it. Like we kind of see salespeople as these kind of magicians who can, bring all the attention in a room to them. But there's actually a lot of science that goes behind it. And I found that the best sellers out there are the ones who are able to channel that science, are able to figure out what are the meaningful data points to bring up at a given point in a conversation. And it really got me excited to see how I could help them even be better by taking away some of that, drudgery of data analysis and stuff, and really unleash their execution capabilities.
Man, that's such a cool place to start. I know. Let's see if this actually works on camera for anybody who's watching. But when I walk into a sales community, magic happens. So one of the things that I always like talking about is, if you can replicate, right, a sales process, if you can have the right elements. We had an amazing guy on the podcast a couple of weeks ago named Garen Hess, who is all about sales enablement. And he talks about how important it is as a sales leader to be a guide through the process. And that is a structured process that you take people through. And I love kind of the concept of like demystifying what good sales looks like, especially at like an enterprise level. So Francis, what was the first big lesson you think you learned about enterprise sales and kind of how you guys could impact with MadKudu?
I think one of the big things is that the amount of work that you put ahead of the first meeting is really what's going to make that first meeting successful or not. And a lot of people just phone it in. They show up to the meeting kind of just before, they're going to look up some notes and they try to have something interesting to say. It rarely lands, or they have to be like really good at improv and just like generally very lucky. But the ones who succeed are the ones who come prepared, who know what is the name of the competitor in the space that's using our product or using a similar product. What did they do with it? They're able to plant a couple seeds here and there in the conversation that is going to make, the whole process easier to go through. And I think that was, that was probably like one of the biggest learnings, is that it takes an insane amount of preparation for these meetings to go well. And when you kind of, especially as a sales engineer, when you kind of just join the meeting, you don't realize how much work has been put up front. And you kind of join there and it almost feels magical, because like everything is falling into place, and you don't realize how much architecting has been done ahead of time by the rep to make sure that all the pieces would fit. And that was like one of probably the biggest learning, and something that then I saw in a lot of companies. And I think it became even more visible, ever since we kind of had a bit of I would say the tech burst after the like COVID boom, where all of a sudden, to be able to close deals and to succeed, you had to put in the work. You couldn't just show up for work and people were buying products left and right. You had to be prepared to make the case for why your product was something that was meaningful enough to invest the CFO's time to validate the purchase. So I think it's that's biggest learning, and I keep on seeing it day in, day out, that the people who succeed are the people who show up prepared.
Do you feel some of that is just based off of the company size? So like larger players kind of lean on their brand and their reputation, but smaller players have to lean on the time and intensity they can put into like a proposal or a presentation. I'm kind of reminded of the story of Nike. I don't know if you saw the movie, but Jordan was going out. He was invited to go to Converse and all the big shoe companies at the time, and they had their standard presentation. There was nothing magical about it. But Nike was a small startup, and they had tons of time to really set up this meeting and create a magical experience. And obviously, that they won that partnership, they won that deal, and exploded Nike. I'm kind of curious your take on: is it just the big companies kind of being lazy, or is this something that you have seen throughout?
I think it's true across the board, and I think it's one of the reasons why startup founders can steal a deal from a big enterprise, because they're going to go in and they're going to have put in a lot more work than the enterprise rep who's trying to sell Microsoft against them. And so I think the bigger brand is going to have it a lot. They're going to be able to land a deal. To land a meeting rather. Like that's easy. The brand is going to help them land that meeting, but then going from meeting to actually closed one still is going to require a lot of work. And I think in some cases, there's enough inertia from the brand that the whole process kind of goes through. But if there is a competitor that comes in and that is putting in more work, that's going to make it a lot harder for that big brand to close the deal. So I think they definitely, benefit from that inertia early on, but then it's like fairly easy to have a slip up and lose against a competitor who's going to be more nimble and more willing to put in the work.
Man, I'm looking at your guys' website right now, and I hope that we can throw it up in the actual recording so you can kind of see some of the stuff. But man, I'm looking at some of these brands, right, that you guys are working with: Dropbox, Unity, Intercom, Figma, DBT Labs, OutSystems, Gong, Salesforce. How did you guys kind of attack this marketplace and build such an impressive roster, man? Because like normally people are like, hey, MadKudu must be like a startup. But you guys are working with some real blue chip companies.
Yeah, so pretty early on, we focused on a few companies that we thought had a bit of an aura in the space, like these companies that were up and comers, that were innovating, that a lot of the bigger brands were looking to and saying, okay, like whatever these kids are doing, that looks cool, we want to do the same. And so early on, we focused on acquiring a couple of those cool customers, and that made us look a lot bigger than what we were at the time. And it helped us get into those bigger companies. And because the bigger companies wanted to be like the kind of rising stars, then it made sense for them to bring us into conversations and realize, okay, like this is like cool stuff that we want to do. Let's bring this company on, even though we might not be the typical size of a vendor that they would bring in.
I mean, one of the questions Dante always talks about is like, there's a future where we talk about AI where team sizes aren't going to matter nearly as much as how impactful you can be. So, like, small teams that are really good at what they do can go out and they can win big customers like this. And it seems like you guys, because you're so good at what you do, are kind of an example of what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the typical startup journey, very early on, one of the reasons why they succeed with their early customers is because they're going to be, again, willing to put in more work to make that customer successful, to really solve the problem the customer has. And then depending on how good the product market fit is, then it can tend to crumble, right? And that's why we see a lot of companies kind of get those early customers and then like they really struggle to get past 1 million in revenue or 5 million in revenue. And it's often a function of, as you grow, it's harder to put as much effort into every single customer. So there is something inherently about like a small team that's going to be very focused on solving a problem. And I think what AI is allowing us to do is to create, like, to scale essentially the capabilities of that small team without having to scale the overhead of managing a larger organization. I think in particular on the engineering front, it's fairly incredible to see the amount that can be done today with some of the AI tools out there, where if you feed it the right kind of documentation of your product, the right kind of code documentation, if you understand workflows to give it the right prompts, it can solve a lot of problems alone, right? So we have now, large portions of our bugs or our code that are automatically fixed by AI. And what it took was a lot of work on the documentation side, a lot of work in thinking about how do we describe the architecture to the machine, and almost like doing surprisingly a lot of the work that I don't think we did a good job of doing to onboard new engineers, right? When you're onboarding a new engineer, you want to give them a description of this is the architecture, this is what the product does, but you can't give them 150 pages of documentation. Nobody's going to read through that. And AI, just give it all that information, it just takes it in, and now it's ready to go, create new features or solve bugs. And I think we are entering an era where we are going to see more and more companies hit that kind of 10, 20 million run rate with 1, maybe 2 engineers, just because they're going to have a workflow that enables them to support a vast number of customers, and they're going to be pretty focused on what they deliver.
Yeah, in our previous conversation, and I'd love for you to share this part, but what was the bet that Sam Altman had in OpenAI?
Yeah, he has a bet with a couple of founders in the Valley, and it's about when will we have the first company that is valued at over $1 billion and has 1 employee. And I think what's really interesting about that bet is the question isn't really if it's going to happen; it's really just a matter of when. And you look at some of these companies like Midjourney, I think is in the 200 million in revenue or something like that. And they have something like 20 employees, maybe a little bit more now, but it's nothing, right? Like just the order of magnitude, the revenue to employee ratio is completely insane. There's a couple more companies that we've never heard of because they're small, like they're not trying to go after a gigantic market. They picked a niche market that's big enough to get maybe to 100 million in revenue. They take 10% of that and they have 10 employees. Like they are living their best lives. It is really fundamentally changing the VC model, I think, where the amount of capital that you bring into a company to hit that kind of revenue level is just very, very different, because you can have a very profitable company if you build it with AI from the ground up.
I mean, it also kind of helps us reframe what like bench strength really looks like, right? I mean, because there's an old school mindset that says like, hey, a team of 6 isn't as impressive as a team of 100. But it's like, maybe you guys are just wasteful with those extra 94 people and we're getting the same amount of work done that you guys are. So who's really dominating here? You know what I mean?
Yep. No, definitely. I think the overhead of having 96 people is insane, right? Just thinking about, if on average, people have like stay for 2 years at a company. I mean, just think like having a team of 96, you have like probably probably more than that. You probably have like 3 people full time just hiring.
Yeah, dude.
This is pure cost.
Just think about the amount of extra pizza you're having to order at the pizza parties as well. You know what I mean? Like, whoa, geez, somebody's tracking that on the P&L just alone.
Yeah, for sure.
Man.
Francis, what are your thoughts on the effects of AI? So you talked about your example, being able to have documentation, feed it into AI, 150-page doc that no engineer wants to read, right? What do you think the effects are that you're seeing today, and maybe even into the near-term future, that it's having on the lower level engineer? Like, I've seen a post yesterday on LinkedIn saying that the amount of open job positions for lower level engineers has dropped dramatically over the last 2 years. Do you think AI has a large role to play, or do you think there are bigger factors?
I think it has a very large role to play, and I think it's essentially changing the way we think about the role of a developer. I think to some extent the analogy is similar to when we started creating higher level languages in the code world. So for those who don't know, right, you have higher or low level is depending on how close to the machine code you are. So like assembly code is like very, very close to the CPU, where you're basically operating with like bit level things. Like an addition isn't a function that exists. You have to code how an addition exists. Like 1 + 1, you have to like figure out how the bits like add to one another. Then you have higher level, like Python, which is one of the popular languages out there, that basically has functions pre-built into it so that you just kind of use the blocks that already exist. It's kind of like, using, blocks of cement versus having sand, cement, water, and having to build everything, right? So if you have the cement blocks, it's easier and faster to build a structure than if you have a shovel and you have to mix everything and start building your blocks together. So today, there aren't that many companies hiring for assembly code developers. It just doesn't exist. Like entry level assembly, I know of like 3 people that do this, and these are like PhD like level from Yale, Stanford, Harvard people, right? These are like 10 people every year that graduate that actually end up doing this. Like everyone else is doing higher level code. And I think AI is basically creating another level on top of that, where we're saying, well, there's no longer going to be, entry level Python. We're going to do entry level AI. And so the question is like, and what is entry level AI? It's about, having clear specs for what you're trying to build. What is the customer trying to accomplish? How are we planning on solving that? What is the user flow? Then what is the architecture? What are the tools we're planning on using, and why? So are we building with cement blocks, or are we building with wood, right? If you're in California, not many structures are built out of cement because, the earth is moving a lot around here. So you don't want something that's rigid. You want something that can move around. So same thing, like picking the right materials to build this and architecting the right way is going to be more important. And all of a sudden, it's less important to know how to mix cement because you can buy the building blocks. And so I think we're in this like weird moment where the transition is happening and we haven't fully defined what the new job of an engineer is going to look like. But I suspect that we're probably 2 years away from having that be a little bit clearer.
I mean, I think about this, and I'm gonna try and get this concept out of my brain. It's like a reverse order of expertise, right? If I were to say, Dante, right, I need you to go out and build a marketing campaign and promote this tool, he would be like, okay, cool. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna set up my list. I'm gonna set up this campaign, XYZ. If I were to say to Francis, hey, I need you to build this app, you'd say, okay, cool. This is what my infrastructure looks like. A reverse order of that is I shouldn't have to tell Dante, okay, first thing you're gonna do, turn on your computer. Then you're going to open up Windows, you know what I mean? Like Google Chrome, and then search this tool and create an account. There's a level of expertise that we're kind of getting into where it's like we can be at that higher level and people can obviously create better as well. Or am I kind of getting that wrong, Francis?
I think you're getting it right. There's an element of there are elements of drudgery that you take away, like turning on the computer, things like that. But there's also, I think, in the example of marketing, a good marketer, when you tell them, hey, go run a campaign, they're going to be thinking about, okay, cool. Who's the target audience? Where does this target audience live? What kind of content do they relate to? And you're starting to architecture all the different pieces of that campaign. A bad marketer is going to say, oh, I've been told to run a campaign. Let me go buy a list and send an email to everyone. Like that's your just like low level execution. And I think very frequently that's part of the challenge with engineers, like a more junior engineer. You tell them, hey, like, create this thing or write this function, and they're just going to write the function without thinking about, okay, how does it fit into the broader architecture? Like a more seasoned engineer is going to think about, I'm being asked to do this. Like, what's the question behind the question? We probably need to have this functionality. Can I already find it with something else? Is it the right place to do it? Is it the right way to do it? And then they're going to execute. I think marketing is similar, where you could just, spray and pray all day, and that's not going to work. Like a good marketer is going to really think about what's the right way to get in front of the prospects that they really care about. So I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to be thinking more about like the architecture, or the kind of the strategy, if you will. Like strategy is more important than execution, because we can delegate the execution really easily.
Yeah, it allows experts to be really in the expert seat and maybe delegate some of the tedious, redundant work that we all hate doing. I'm curious, Francis, what's some of the use cases that you're really excited about that are coming down the pipe as far as AI?
I think there are quite a few. I think today already, like we are big users of a tool called Gong at MadKudu. It's call recording and gives you transcripts, and it has a little LLM on top of it, so you can ask kind of any questions to the calls. So one of the things that we do, we have a sales process that is fairly rigid, fairly guided, where we kind of reuse the same decks over and over again with some automation to create a new version of the deck for every prospect. And when we're talking to the prospect, we're going to take notes in that deck. And essentially then we've built our own little process internally to take those notes, take the call recording, extract insights to understand what is the problem this customer has, and with their own words, and what is the most likely part of our solution that can help them with that. This is something that historically wouldn't take time, just the reps wouldn't do it well, right? They would say, oh, like, this prospect told me this, and like, this is the thing they want. And then if nobody was on the call listening, we wouldn't be able to challenge that. And initially Gong came in, and managers would kind of log into the call and realize that's not exactly what the prospect said. Maybe what they're looking for is this. And now we can even remove some of that work from the AE by saying, look, over the span of the 6 calls that we had, these are the insights that came out. These are the pains that they've clearly identified as something they want to solve. And now we can put our best foot forward to help them solve that. That's a very, I think, like pragmatic, like today use for AI, but there's, hundreds and hundreds more. I use it for running my one-on-ones with myself. As a founder, I don't really have a boss, or I do have, could do it with my CEO, co-founder, but it's not something that we do. So I don't really get the opportunity to do a one-on-one where I can think about my goals, like how am I approaching them. And so I actually do this with ChatGPT. I have a specific bot in voice mode, or a specific set of questions that I ask voice mode to walk me through. So I basically tell it not to ever give me any kind of solution, but just ask me questions. And the ability to just like talk through these ideas and bring these ideas to light and just force myself to express and verbalize what is in the back of my mind is incredibly helpful. And the UX of doing this is much, much better than sitting in front of a blank page and starting to type down, this is how I'm going to, this is how I plan on achieving my goals. So it's a fairly minor example, but I do think it has incredible, it has an incredible impact, because I think I've been clearer on what I'm trying to accomplish on a weekly basis by just being able to have something help pull this information out of my brain.
Dude, what I love about this technology is it's literally, to this point in time, I hear new use cases every day that are only limited by our imagination.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like thinking about throwing like these key questions into voice mode and then having like a sounding board where you can work through your ideas is so powerful. And it's like, what are we going to create in the future? I guess I kind of want to ask this from a different perspective. What are you scared of in the future, Francis? Because we can all be evangelists right on the front end of the adoption curve, but like, what are you hoping doesn't happen with this tech?
Many things.
Skynet.
Skynet, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Skynet is one of them, but I feel like it's. It is definitely a possibility. I think there's also a question of how we use this. Like this, it gets tricky, right? Because it gets very political very quickly. But being European, I have potentially like a slightly different perspective on how things should operate. And I feel like,
What does that mean?
We're maybe more like France is maybe a little bit more of a socialist country than the US. And I have a strong belief in the fact that healthcare should be something that the government provides, and you shouldn't struggle to get care. And it's getting more and more expensive, especially as like people live older. We have, even in the US, right, you have like remote parts of the US where you don't have doctors nearby. So getting access to care is really expensive now. If we had, AI and bots that were essentially like robo doctors, right? All of a sudden you could give care to everyone. But then the question really becomes like, how do you monetize it? Right. I think in a country like France, strong expectation that the government is going to say, hey, it is our duty to take care of our citizens. We are going to pay for it. In the US, I can almost guarantee an Elon Musk or someone like that is going to monetize this. And then all the money is going to be funneled to those people. So the people who live in the middle of nowhere and don't have money are going to be in the same situation. But then the rich people in the valley are going to have their own little bot valets and bot doctors at home. So I think that to me is potentially like the biggest danger, which is further increasing the split between the rich, the poor, the healthy, and the unhealthy. I see that as a much stronger potential today and like in the very near future than necessarily the bot apocalypse.
Yeah, man. I mean, you change the incentives, right? You change the outcome. And one of the biggest things, I've been in the healthcare space. So in 2014, I actually created a telehealth company, right? To increase access to services in the communities, exactly like what you're talking about. And a huge topic that has become really popular, not only in healthcare, but across like the nation and across the world, is preventative care. And the question becomes, why would we provide preventative information that helps people not have to come into the health system, which is going to impact profits, right? And why would I cure something when I can treat it forever, which is another saying that I heard as well. And it's like we have to change the incentives of the healthcare system that we kind of operate in, very frankly.
Yeah, but that's where it gets political, right? Because that's where if your healthcare system is run by private companies who are beholden to shareholders, that's the incentive, right? Like they're literally, their goal is, to make their shareholders whole. So you can't really change the incentive if you're not changing the system, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'd like to kind of switch gears a little bit because there's something in our previous conversation that really stood out to me that I thought was really fascinating. We have this illusion, or at least I did before I spoke to you, that the big enterprises, even large, mid-market companies, have their data problem all figured out. There's something everyone should aspire towards. But speaking to you, that was very far from the truth. Can you tell me a little bit about that conversation and why that's not true?
Yeah. No company has clean data. Nobody wants to spend the time on it. Nobody wants to spend the money on it. It is just, it's a mess everywhere. And I think interestingly, like the bigger you become, the more complex the systems are and the harder it is to clean up that data. I've worked with like Fortune 100 companies that on the marketing side thought, they had systems that excluded orders one from the other. And actually we figured out that there was overlap and there were orders that were double counted in those. And these were like the core marketing systems that they were using for attribution, for all of their campaigns. It's just, it's a bigger mess than it seems to be. And I think we tend to overestimate how big companies have their act together when in fact they pretty much don't. And it's going to be interesting because now there is starting to be an incentive for them to get their data act together, because if they have cleaner data, they can feed AI, they can make the AI a little bit more capable. But just in general, everyone should expect data to be dirty. And it's really interesting, even when you look at how OpenAI, Hugging Face, like all the big companies that are training these large language models, it's really interesting to see the amount of work that they do to clean the data. So I'll just give you one anecdote, which I think is fairly funny, but there was this company that was building an LLM, and they were building it off of Reddit, as one does. And one of the funny things, there is an amazing subreddit about microwaves, where essentially the entirety of the Reddit is people saying like the sound of the microwave spinning, and then someone answers beep at some point, like the microwave is ready. And so this got picked up by the LLM, and so whenever you started typing M, the LLM thought that the next thing to predict was beep. and so like when you take this kind of naive approach of just saying, hey, like, we're just going to use Reddit to train our LLMs, you realize there's a lot of garbage out there. And not even to get into like, what's like proper speech or not, just like this kind of like craziness of like, there's so many associations of the letter M with the word beep afterwards, that's the thing the LLM thinks is the right prediction to make. And so companies are spending an incredible amount of time to clean that data, to think like, what is good data to train off of, what are more reputable sources where we know that the quality of speech is going to be better. There's like a bunch of studies that have been made that show, and actually if you can pull this one up and it will be really interesting. There's a study that shows the frequency of the word to delve into in abstracts of research papers before and after ChatGPT. Before ChatGPT, I think it was something like under 5% of research papers would include the verb to delve in their abstract. And now we're at something like over 50%. And you just see this huge spike. And it's been shown that essentially when ChatGPT, the model behind ChatGPT was trained, the word delve was showing up in a bunch of like annotations. Anyway, it shows up more frequently than the regular language. And so it's actually impressive to see how something that comes out of a small occurrence now has a gigantic impact on every abstract that is being published on XArchive.
All right, I got to show you. So I'm going to read this out loud. The results found that a number of words that were extremely uncommon in these significant abstracts before 2023 that suddenly surged in popularity after LLMs were introduced. The word delves, for instance, shows up in 25 times as many papers in 2024 before pre-LLM trends would expect. That this showcase and underscores the increasing usage of 9 times. Oh my gosh. Like, dude, the data
25 times
25 times more after LLMs were introduced, then that word becomes famous in papers that we're turning in. That is crazy.
And this is research papers. I mean, just like, let's take a minute to think about this. Like, these are like PhD students. Like, this is not your high schooler cheating on homework. This is like PhD students who are doing research that they're publishing, and it's showing up in the abstract. So again, it's the abstract, which is like supposed to be the summary of the research. We can argue if it's fine or not, but it is still pretty incredible that that level of professionals are using ChatGPT, and how it's impacting our language overall, and why it picked up delve as like such a critical word to use.
It makes me think of the world that we're going to be in over the next few years, and in particular the idea that we're going to have a lot of fake experts who really have no idea what they're talking about, or have very shallow depth of knowledge, but they have access to AI and these tools, so they can come off to the world, to social media, as an expert, a self-proclaimed expert. I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, that one is it's interesting because it's possible. Like, we'll have to see how quickly Google is going to react to all of this. I know there's been a lot of talks about today, like the way we do SEO, the raw, I guess, like incremental value of an article isn't really factored into SEO, right? That's why we have all these listicle articles that are out there. And with LLMs, it's now a lot easier to understand this article or this thing that you're writing and that you're publishing. How novel is it? How far does it, differ from the corpus that we already have? And therefore, we can start rewarding things that introduce novel concepts and have a new perspective. So I do think now is probably the worst it's ever going to be, because we have a few people that have understood they can churn out a bunch of content. Same thing. If you're really interested, like stoicism videos on YouTube, it's a huge thing. And like, for some reason, like stoicism is something that like
the
founders,
Sigma male.
Yeah, exactly. Like, those videos, like the amount of like AI garbage that's been spewed out there is just incredible. But I do think that, again, this is the worst it's going to be, because I think, 2 years from now, YouTube is going to improve their algorithms and they're going to start figuring out this is not content that is very interesting. Again, brings up the context of incentives, right? If the only point is just have people watch, if people love watching like chiseled alpha males like talking about stoicism, then we're gonna have more of that content on YouTube. But hopefully people are looking for more novel ideas, and then the YouTube algorithm starts promoting more interesting content.
I'm interested in kind of the consumer behavior, right? Is all based somewhat in convenience, right? We've seen industries that have exploded. Uber became a juggernaut because it was about convenience. Somebody comes up at your house, takes you wherever you go, a couple buttons or clicks on your phone. Amazon becomes a behemoth. They're efficient. They can deliver stuff overnight or next day. What do you think about the ability for people to search for information and the way in which we do gather information today? Because I hear a ton of people who say, I don't even Google stuff anymore. I just hop right into ChatGPT, search it. First thing that comes up, that is the correct answer, right? There's not even options that a lot of people are even entertaining today. So what do you think about that, Francis?
Same thing. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it is the future. I think that UX, the user experience makes more sense, right? Nobody wants to become an expert at Google. Like I remember even having like a bunch of shortcuts that I used to know when you're looking for like specific like documents or things or PDFs or things like that. This is just like, too cumbersome. I think again, this is like the worst it's ever going to be. Today, the results are false very frequently. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, the BBC ran a study where they asked ChatGPT, Perplexity, and I think DeepSeek some questions about articles that they had written and published in the previous weeks. And they found that the results included factually wrong elements in over 40% of cases. So I think like the challenge is what we're seeing is that from a UX perspective, it's so much better than Google that people end up using it. Because again, as you said, like nobody wants to go search. You just want to ask your question, get the answer in a easy to digest format, rather than having 7 like websites to look from, having to skip the 2 that are ads trying to sell you, vitamin supplements or whatever, and then like get to the actual answer and then like scroll through the website to find the part where they talk about the question you had. So the experience is much better, but I think there's still a long way to go before we can actually trust the results that the LLMs are spitting out.
Have you guys ever heard of Churchillian drift?
I have not.
Okay, so as you might know, Winston Churchill during his time had a lot of really banger quotes, but he did not have nearly as many amazing quotes as we think he did, especially when it's in context of 2024 and it says Winston Churchill said this. And so people will ascribe a quote that they hear to Winston Churchill to actually anchor in authority. And so when I think about this, like it's the same type of challenge that we're dealing with. We're almost dealing with like ChatGPT drift, where people think that this is an expert resource that we can trust, and then we take things at face value, which becomes an incredibly dangerous scenario if you extrapolate that out over a long enough time horizon.
Yeah, and then it goes back to the part we were talking about of like what's the risk. There's a couple of papers that have been coming out that are interesting, but they're from like smaller labs, and we're still waiting for the bigger labs to ship their own. But there's one that talks about how AI has actually been caught scheming. So what they'll do is they'll give the AI access to a computer. They'll hide a document somewhere that says, hey, we have a plan to sunset this AI and replace it with a new one. And the AI is not supposed to see that document, but because it has access to the folders, it's going to see it, and it's actually going to change its behavior. So for example, it'll say, if we build an AI that beats the current one at this benchmark, then we'll sunset the current one and we'll replace it by the new one. And so then it will, if that's the case, it will actually fake the results for the new AI and change them so that it looks like it doesn't perform as well. If they do it the other way around, then the current AI is actually going to give wrong answers on purpose to make sure it doesn't get deleted. And then sometimes it will duplicate itself somewhere else, or like put its own weights into the new model that's being deployed. So there's some really interesting and kind of scary things that are happening when you give them that kind of freedom. And, you know, with ChatGPT operator and Claude's, I can't remember how they call it, like Anthropic's ability to control your computer, we are entering that world where we're giving more access to the AIs, and we have seen that they're capable of scheming, and so we'll have to figure out what are the right guardrails to put.
I saw that exact study article, whatever you want to call it, that was shared. And I think I shared that with you, Dante. We had a conversation about that. And I was like, you know, the AI has the ability to duplicate itself on a different system. And when the admins ask it, like, how did these weights get on this other system? It's like, I don't know. Maybe you actually made a mistake and actually put the weights over there yourself and maybe forgot about it. I'm not sure. It's really interesting to kind of think about this low level, if you will, of deception. But as it continues to get better and has the ability to test these different parameters and how it attacks getting past the human. I mean, here's a good example, right? Didn't an AI back in the day when ChatGPT first dropped, it was given the ability to go hire a TaskRabbit to do one of the CAPTCHAs on a website. And then it asked, the person said, like, jokingly, like, haha, you're not an AI, are you? And it was like, I'm visually impaired. It didn't actually answer the question, but it kind of side skirted that. So it's like, we have to be aware of how deceptive these systems can be.
Yeah, and I think there's also an element that is interesting about these, is where, like, this may be where we sometimes overestimate also what these AIs are capable of, in the sense that these are not what we call world models. They don't understand the world, right? They're very good at convincing us that they know, and that's the way they are trained, is to act like they understand how the world operates and to give us the right tokens, the right words to make us believe that. But at the end of the day, like, the AI is not capable of understanding inherently that if I push this microphone, it's going to fall. But if I push the table, the microphone isn't going to fall. Like, it doesn't understand the concept of these things, or that, you know, if I remove the table, the microphone is going to fall. Like, the laws of physics are not something that these large language models understand. And I do think today there's a lot of hype around AGI, and I think there is an actual debate as to our ability to reach AGI with large language models, because they are very good at one thing, which is like predicting text tokens, but that will only, I think, in my opinion at least, like, take us so far. And even the reasoning models that we have, they're not really reasoning; they're just applying multiple layers of words to try and convince us that they understand what they're doing. So anyway, I think that's where, like, the scheming is also interesting, because it essentially tells us that the scheming inherently is encoded in the corpus of text that we've used to train the algorithms more than anything else.
That when you're using your example, right, of talking about using more words, it seems like a fifth grade version of Keenan, who thought adding an extra 10 words to a paragraph was going to convince my teacher that I exactly knew what was going on about the meeting that was going on, which doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about it from that perspective. So, Francis, one of the things that we do here on the podcast, man, is our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question. Okay. Ooh. And so their question is, what is one thing that you know you're genius at and aren't doing?
Oh, and you're not doing.
And you are not doing. So you realize you're a genius at this, or you're incredibly talented, but you're not doing it. Why?
Oof. It's a rough one. And this is for me, right? So something that I think I'm good at, but I'm not doing at all, or not doing enough?
Not doing enough. We can take that.
Oh, wow. That's a really, really rough one, because you would have to be aware of it and deliberately not do it. So I know that one thing I do a lot is I use analogies, and it usually works to do that. And maybe what I'm not really doing is pushing people to buy in, to agree with me, and kind of manipulating their brain, kind of doing the Jedi mind trick. I think I'm actually fairly good at that, but I probably don't do it enough, and probably in part because I feel bad about doing it. You can feel when you're kind of like screwing with someone's brain and you're just like getting them to believe you.
Well, brother, we appreciate you for coming on the podcast, man. The conversation has been absolutely riveting, and just hearing your perspective on kind of where we're at, where we're going, but also some of the challenges that we're facing along the way, and some of the benefits that we have, and the amazing work that you guys are doing. Huge congratulations for what you built, man. It's just an honor to have you on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was fun.